Good afternoon, Keith Tebow, FRCMedia. Thank you for joining us today. We've talked a lot over the past year in terms of how schools have been impacted by COVID-19. And my guest for today, we talked to her back in the summer before school started for the 2020-2021 school year. And it's from a teacher's perspective. And it's been a while since we've got an update from the Florida Educators Association. I'm pleased to be joined by its president, Rebecca Cusick. Rebecca, how are you? Thank you for joining me.
I'm doing well. How are you, Keith?
I am doing well. Let me just start off, if I could, with Superintendent Malone. As you know, there's been allegations brought up against the superintendent. There was an investigation by the school committee. They have sanctioned the superintendent. There's been a lot of talk about what's been going on. What's the official FREA stance on the situation involving the superintendent?
Yeah, so we really haven't taken an official position as an association because we probably know as much as you do. We've not seen the report. We know, what we see in the press about the comments that he's made, that he's owned, and we obviously don't condone that type of comment. But none of our members were ever interviewed as part of the investigation or were involved in the investigation. So for that point, we did not make a public position on this. We know that the school committee has has followed the process and issued what they believe is appropriate discipline. So we probably are just as informed about the nature of the situation as you are.
And as far as you know, there have been no members that have been impacted at all by anything that has happened in this investigation?
Yeah, to my knowledge, none of our members were part of this investigation. So.
All right. So I want to move on now to how the teachers have been dealing, teaching, in a hybrid situation and in a remote situation for the past year. When we spoke last summer, there was some reservations on your part and of the teachers' part in terms of, what it would be like going back for the new school year. As we all know now, in the Fall River Public Schools, it's working under a hybrid model, even though high school students are not quite back yet after the remote turnaround around Christmas time. So let me just ask you, Rebecca, how have teachers generally been handling this now that we're well into the school year and we'll probably finish in this hybrid model or maybe some in-person going forward?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think I'm really proud of the way our educators have responded to this situation. It has not been easy. There have been a lot of challenges in the form of using new technology, new platforms, trying to get training that we need, making sure the Wi-Fi works, but they've risen to the occasion. We've been working out of the building since the beginning. I know there's a lot of misinformation about that out there, that teachers are not working, but I think our teachers are actually working harder than ever. We have many members who, were very concerned about the health and safety aspect of being in the buildings. There has been, a significant number of educators across the state of Massachusetts who've had positive cases of COVID, but again, how much we can trace to actually being shared in the buildings, it's hard to tell where it comes from sometimes. But, we have maintained the 6 feet of social distancing, the masking. When community numbers have been high, the district has shifted to more of a remote mode. But our in-person cohort A kids, our high needs population, they've remained in person for the majority of the school year.
Let me ask you, as you mentioned, all the teachers have been reporting to school every day, whether they're teaching remotely or in some of the cohorts where they have students in classes. What has their response been when they're able to physically meet with their students in the hybrid model? Some students are in it sometimes, some are not. Have they seen a difference in terms of student attitudes and student learning competencies when they're in person? We all know that in person is better, but have they actually seen that difference in terms of some of your members?
Yeah, so it's really hard to engage all kids remotely. Part of what makes teaching so magical is the relationship that takes place between the educator and the student. And, it's hard to replicate an in-person experience with a remote experience. That said, I think there's a segment of our student population that actually is thriving remotely. As you know, all parents have the right to have their child educated remotely this year. But educators want nothing more than to go back to full in person, but they want to do it safely, and they want to be sure that it's the appropriate time to make that decision. This hybrid model is really hard. When the state changed the time on student learning regulations, synchronous instruction, which is also known as live instruction, became a requirement for all students based on a certain number of hours. And in the hybrid model, we have students in front of us, and we have another cohort of students who are learning at home, who are doing work during their off week. Well, now we have to do a lot of our instruction simultaneously. So we're teaching kids in front of us while we are also teaching the kids online at home. And I want you to imagine what it's like being in a meeting, a Zoom meeting. We all know what it's like to be in that sort of a meeting, while you're also trying to keep the attention of another group in front of you and follow along with that meeting online. It's a very challenging thing. So in that respect, I think our educators look forward to the day when they can be fully in person with their students. They do miss them, they want to be with them, and they want to be able to build those relationships that are key.
I know a lot of will come out when all this is said and done. There'll be, I'm sure, studies not only on a local level, a regional, and a national level in terms of how this had all worked for teachers and students moving forward. But are some of your members seeing, an added challenge of trying to connect with students in general? I mean, you've got some high performing students that, are they seeing some high performing students maybe not doing as well because of that? I'll call it a digital divide, if you will, because they're not in person.
Yeah, there's definitely a mixed bag there. So you do have some students who thrive in this format, and then you have other students it's harder to reach. And, just getting them to turn on their screens for the lesson, can be a challenge. And I understand why students may not be comfortable turning on their screen. But if you're an educator and you're looking at 30 blank screens in front of you, it's kind of demotivating. One thing I can say that probably has been better, which we may find out when we do those studies, is that we have made more of an effort to reach out to parents in unconventional ways than ever before. Our parent-teacher conferences, many of them have taken place online, and I'm hearing from teachers that they're actually getting a really good response, and parents are very engaged and very involved in the education process. So in that respect, we may be learning some unconventional ways to connect with parents that we had not previously, engaged in before.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe again, some practices that may carry over, right, when things get back to normal in some way, shape, or form. Back when the superintendent announced the hybrid model that we're currently in, you had done a survey with your members, and a lot of your members were still concerned about the health and safety aspects of being in school. And you had called that the membership was still primarily looking to do more of a remote teaching model. Have you done any other surveys? I know what's done is done. You've got an MOA to continue in this model for the time being, but are you still hearing some of those concerns? How has the school department handled some of those concerns?
Well, through our negotiations and through the FFCRA, which was the first coronavirus relief law, we were able to address many of the concerns of our educators who had serious pre-existing conditions that put their health at risk. So they were able to take leave if they needed to. So we were able to address some of that through bargaining. That said, I think we do still have, some members who are very concerned about how safe it is. I think the key is in adhering to the 6 feet of social distancing, to making sure everyone's wearing their mask when they're supposed to ensure that testing is in place for those who need it for COVID testing. We're seeing our community numbers start to go down. So I do know that the general membership shares some sense of relief at that. But as the state starts to open up, we're going to have to watch those community numbers carefully to make sure that they don't begin to climb. So I would say, while many of our educators do feel safer than they did probably back in September, we do have a group who still, share the concerns for a variety of reasons, whether it's that they live with vulnerable family members, or they have, health concerns themselves.
Last week, the commissioner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education recommended, and it's his hope that all elementary school students will be back in the classroom full-time, in person, sometime in April. What are you hearing about this in terms of a teacher standpoint, and what will it mean in terms of the FREA working with the school department to make that part of a reality if it is to come down from the state?
Yeah, so that announcement was a little frustrating, not because we don't want the kids fully in person, because like I said, I think that would be easier in many respects than trying to make this hybrid model be really effective. I think what frustrates me is how often the state has changed the rules of the game. So they have asked districts to submit plans for hybrid learning, remote learning, whatever that particular school committee in that community decided to do. They approved those plans and then they changed them. So they first changed the requirements for synchronous instruction, where we are in the position of teaching kids remotely while teaching kids in person at the same time. And now they're talking about in March changing the student learning time regulations once again to bring all kids back fully in person, starting with the elementary level, which I would say makes the most sense. What concerns me about that is it has very little regard for what is going on in each particular community. School committees have the authority to make those decisions based on what they feel the needs of their particular district are. And by taking away that local control, the state is sort of usurping that power that to say, here's what you're going to do. And no details have been worked out yet. We haven't seen what the commissioner is going to propose to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, so we don't know. Is that plan going to recommend keeping 6 feet? Is that plan going to, make everybody go down to 3 feet of social distancing, because they've sort of indicated that that's what they would like to see? So I think the devil is in the details. While we would love to have our kids back fully in person, I think there's a local control concern on the part of school committees, and I think that our teachers feel it needs to be done safely. We would certainly like to have the opportunity to have educators who want to get the vaccine as well, so that if we are fully in person, we feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Educators, I believe, are later on in phase 2 of the distribution of the vaccine. Do you think they should be given a little more priority based on the need of the pressures being put on those leaders in the state to get people back in school?
I don't think that educators are more important than anybody else, but what I would say is we're frustrated with the fact that the state released an initial plan and they've bumped educators back twice. So we have been moved back down in the priority list a couple of times. And then the state changed the requirement for people going to get a vaccine, being able to bring someone with them, and then that individual could also get a vaccine, which, again, with a limited supply, what that does is it puts us back further in the list. So we're a little frustrated with that. I know that the PFFM, the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts, and the Mass Teachers Association, along with AFT, they came up with a plan to vaccinate educators in a pilot program for probably 10 to 20 very large districts, high needs, high community transmission districts. They were going to contract with a company to get the vaccines, and the paramedics would be doing the vaccines on site for educators that wanted to take advantage of it. All the groundwork was done. All the state had to do was approve the program, and the state said no. They want to prioritize giving the vaccine at the sites that they are setting up instead. So we are frustrated with the fact that we've really tried to be part of the solution here. And I would say, as far as prioritizing educators, the educators who work in person with our highest needs kids, they should get priority over all other educators, because they are working very close, many times in less than 6 feet of social distancing with those high needs populations. So we are a little bit frustrated about the vaccine rollout, and I don't think we're alone. I think many people share that frustration. And we're hoping that with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, with a greater supply, that we will be able to get educators vaccinated, hopefully by April.
Yeah. Also coming up soon is the latest round of MCAS testing, and I know that there's been some concerns in terms of whether in this educational environment MCAS should still be not only given but given some weight. Where does the FREA stand on this?
So I can tell you personally, MCAS has been a problematic test for many reasons, but this year, it, in my opinion, is a completely ridiculous waste of time and resources. In a time where we are, lamenting lost learning or lost instruction time, we're going to take a significant chunk of time out of a kid's day to give them a test that we know is going to show different results than it did last year, given that their year has looked entirely different. So we believe it's a waste of time and a waste of resources. We do have a subcommittee of FREA members working on how to advocate for MCAS not to take place this year. I think, the millions of dollars are spent on that test every year, that's money that could be better used elsewhere throughout our schools this year.
Yeah. One final question I want to ask is in terms of the long-term strength of the FREA, if you will. The current collective bargaining agreement between the teachers and the school department actually expired last year. It was extended a year as part of the MOA. And the COVID restrictions. What's the status of moving forward on a new contract between the school department and teachers?
So we're really anxious to get going on bargaining a 3-year successor agreement. We, like you said, have been in bargaining mode for an MOA all year long. If the state again changes student learning time regulations, we'll have to do it a third time. So we've had several iterations of a memorandum of agreement that address our working conditions. We may be forced into doing that again, but our goal is to have this wrapped up, a 3-year successor agreement wrapped up by June. I'm stepping down in this position as president, and my goal personally is to make sure our membership is left with a 3-year contract before I exit this position.
Yeah. And obviously, a lot has to happen between now and then. Rebecca Cusick, president of the Florida Educators Association. Thank you for your time as always. Good luck, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
All right. And thank you for joining us today here in FRCmedia. I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great day.